everyone for this School Education Gateways Teacher Academy webinar on literacy and literacy skills in schools. And today we have two presentations by three speakers. So first we have Professor Christine Garbe, I hope I pronounced it correctly,
yes,
from University of Köln, and I'm sure you can also introduce yourself and your background a bit more in detail. And then we also have Nicoletta van der Putte and Nathalie Verstrehu. I don't know if I got that right, I'm not sure but you can with my pronunciation, but I'm sure you will introduce yourself a bit more in detail with your presentation. So first we have Christine, who can start the presentation, and I have your slide.
Okay, so hello everybody. I hope that you all can hear me. And I have to apologize, I have a little cold, so my voice might not be the best, but hopefully it's good enough. So I have the great pleasure to talk to you today about teaching literacy in schools. And I will focus on teaching literacy in the secondary schools across all school subjects. So let's see how the slides move. At the moment, they don't. Probably, Asi, you might, oh no, I think I have to do it here. Yeah, okay. So just, I will start to give you a tiny little context, and you may all have heard about the European Framework of Key Competences for Lifelong Learning. The first version dated back, I think, to the early 2004 or something, or 2006. And last year, it has been revised in a long process. And also I was involved in this process. And the outcome you can see here, the European Commission defined 8 key competences. And as you can see, literacy is in the first place. Literacy as a basis for further learning and communication in different societal and cultural contexts. So I think that gives us a little idea already about the importance of literacy. And of course, also, I will not go into the details here. You can see all the key competences with which the European Commission considers as relevant for lifelong learning. Literacy on the European level became an issue after the first PISA study, which was made in 2000 and was published in 2001. And PISA is an international student assessment, which is organized by the OECD Organization of, for Economic Cooperation and Development. And they focus on the following definition of literacy, which has become the most important one. It's by far not the only one of about what is literacy, but they define reading literacy as the ability to understand, evaluate, use, and engage with written texts, to participate in society, to achieve one's goals, and to develop one's knowledge and potential. Actually, this is the definition which was used since 2009 in the PISA study 2009 and the following ones. In the previous definition, there was no engagement included, so it was only the ability to understand, evaluate, and use written texts. But it's focusing on written language, so this is very, very important. And since the first PISA study in 2000, in the year 2000, we have had a lot of international assessments on reading literacy. You see, we have the Pearl studies, which are made all 5 years. In 2001 was the first one. And it's assessing 4th graders, so students at the end of primary schools, or in some countries at the end of primary schools and the others not. And it is called the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study for primary students. Then the PISA studies, which I just mentioned, Program for International Student Assessment. is assessing 15-year-olds all 3 years. And 15 years old because in an international perspective, this is more or less the end of compulsory schooling. So it's usually assessing 9th graders. Sometimes they're 8th graders, sometimes they're 10th graders, but usually at the end of compulsory schooling. And PISA assesses so-called basic competences for lifelong learning. So they started with reading literacy in 2000, then mathematical literacy in 2003, science literacy in 2006, and then 2009 again, reading literacy, math, science, etc. And PIAC, also done by the OECD, is the program for international assessment of adult competencies, where also literacy, in the same definition of literacy, has been assessed by 16 to 65-year-olds, so by adults. And roughly speaking, all these international reading assessments since 2000 came to the conclusion that more or less across Europe, 20% of children, adolescents, and adults lack basic reading skills. So they are not equipped with advanced reading skills, or let's say sufficient reading skills, in order to continue learning after school, or in order to successfully learn at school. So this is the problem which Europe faces, and of course not only Europe, it's a worldwide problem, but now here we talk in a European context. This is the problem which Europe faces, and since then it has become a European topic. And for example, in the education and training benchmarks of the European Union, always the reduction of poor readers, of students or adults with low literacy skills, is one of the main topics. If you want to learn more about the reading literacy assessments and the results for your specific countries, you should go to the ELINet website. ELINet is one of the projects. I will just give you an overview of my engagement in the literacy projects. It's one of the literacy projects. It was the biggest one which I ever coordinated. It was funded by the European Commission between 2014 and 2016 with a 3 million euro grant, so a lot of money. And this network, this European Literacy Policy Network, included 80 partner organizations from 28 countries. And for all those 28 countries, we have written literacy country reports where you can find all the specific numbers, the results of those assessments for children, adolescents, and adults. So if you go to the link research, which you can see here, then you will find those country reports, and then you can go more into the details. I will just give you one more example in a minute. So my personal background, as you have already heard, I have been a professor at the University of Cologne, and originally I'm a high school teacher, so a secondary teacher for German language and literature, history and social sciences. But then I have become a professor in teacher education, and I work for more than 30 years now in teacher education. And also I coordinated big literacy projects since, let's say, that PISA shock. So the first one started in 2006, and it was called Adora, Teaching Struggling Adolescent Readers, a comparative study of good practices in European countries, where we worked with partners from 11 European countries and some American experts. And the follow-up was the Comenius project, Bacolod, in 2011 to 2012. It was about developing a basic curriculum for teachers in service training in content area literacy in secondary schools with partners from 7 countries. And the follow-up to that one was called ISIT, Implementation Strategies for Innovations in Teachers' Professional Development. I will quickly finish this row. So then I coordinated this already mentioned European Policy Network, ELINet. And also in the last 3 years, I coordinated another professional development project about blended learning in teachers' professional development. So from these two projects, you can find much more information on the project websites, which you find here. Whereas the first three projects, the project websites, they are no longer online. So I will talk a little more about these projects, especially about Adora and Bacolod, because as I guess that most of you are working as teachers in schools, these two projects might be of a specific interest for you. So let's start with the Adora project, which started in 2006. And just to give you an example, when I talked about on average 20% of so-called poor readers or struggling readers, as we call them here, so 15-year-olds, according to PISA, who failed to reach the competence level number 2. So level number 2 is like the sufficient basis level of literacy skills. And number 5 is the most excellent level. And below number 2, the OECD and the PISA experts consider students to have poor reading skills. So as you can see here in this overview of the Adora participating countries, we had included the best European country, Finland, where we had only almost less than 5% of struggling readers. And we had the poorest performer in Europe in 2006 in the PISA study, which was Romania with more than 50% of struggling readers. And we had in between a lot of other countries between 15 and let's say 25% of struggling readers, which of course is much too much. If one of 5 students struggles with literacy skills, then we really have a problem. So that was the starting point of the Adora project. And so the idea of this project, or let's say the Socrates program call, was about better understanding of the phenomenon of poor reading skills and poor readers in order better to combat the problem. I always like this call very much because it has such a practical target, really not only to produce knowledge, but to produce knowledge in order to help to make the situation better. So our goal in the Adora project was to find out the key elements of good practice in teaching literacy, not only, but especially for poor readers in secondary schools. And we looked all in all, we visited 30 schools in these 11 countries with innovative literacy programs. And then we analyzed all those case studies, and we defined key elements of good practice on classroom level, school level, community level, and national level. And I will show you the 7 key elements which we defined on classroom level. Here you can see our overall findings. We published a book in 2010 after the project, which is still available, so you can read about all those 15 key elements of good practice which we found out in our study. And I will show you the results for classroom level, because I think if you're teachers, this is of course the most important practice field for you. So our main finding was that the superior goal of all classroom practice for struggling readers and learners should be to change their self-concepts of poor readers and poor learners to transform them into self-confident readers and learners. And what is needed are those 7 key elements: designing a supportive teacher-student and student interaction, applying diagnostic forms of assessment, involving students in planning the learning process, choosing engaging reading materials, involving students in texts, teaching cognitive and metacognitive reading strategies, and creating an inspiring reading engagement. And we developed something which we call the Adora reading instruction cycle for good classroom practice. So you see that the classroom environment and the teacher-student interaction are, so to say, overarching conditions. And then our cycle, the teaching cycle, starts with identifying students' needs. So what do my students already know and have learned, and what do they need for their further learning process? So then defining, ideally together with the students, their next achievement objectives. So in a personalized learning environment where you can give the students individualized support, this is very important to involve them at this point already. What are my next steps? What are my next goals? Then choosing engaging learning media, reading materials. Then involve students in dealing with texts and give them tools, cognitive and metacognitive strategies to understand texts. And then, of course, monitor their learning progress. And then the cycle starts again. So you have monitored what have they learned now and what will be the next steps for them. And all this will help them to support their positive self-concept and a positive self-efficacy as learners and readers. So that was a very important finding of Adora. And also we found out that the key, let's say the key variable, the key factor for transforming school practice are the teachers. So raising teachers' literacy expertise is crucial. And so this was not only a Adora finding afterwards in the Hattie studies and in many other studies. Of course, we learned about that the teachers are the real crucial transformers for classroom practice. So here I cited another McKinsey study which made an international comparative study. What are the common features of good educational systems? And they found out it's the teachers, and it's the teachers' qualification and the teachers' engagement. So that's why we decided after the Adora study to design the Bacolod project, where we didn't only want to analyze good practice in schools, but we wanted to design a professional development program for teachers in order to enable teachers of all subjects to include literacy into their teaching, into their daily classroom practice. And so this is what we want to design a basic curriculum for teachers in service training or professional development in content area literacy in secondary schools. Because the teachers, they are right, they tell us, well, I studied math, I didn't study literacy, or I studied geography, or I studied languages or arts or whatever. So we said then, okay, we have to give them a chance to qualify themselves in this domain. So we worked with those countries, which you can see here. And this was our main objective, to develop a PD course. And what we did with our partners, we drafted 6 modules for teacher professional development in an English master version. Then we translated all the materials into the national languages. Then we piloted all the modules in all countries with a target group, so with teachers. We evaluated the piloting, analyzed the results, and revised the course. So that was a very ambitious program for 2 years, but we managed to do it. And actually, I made available now the main results of this project to you for download. So let's go a little more into the details with the question, what is content area literacy? Or nowadays you also find often the term disciplinary literacy. And I will give you a very simple example for starting, just to reflect on what literacy is basically. So what do we process when we read something? Like this little sign, it is a photo which I just took in my Easter holidays in the northern German countryside. So if you enter into this very small village, you find this sign, drive slowly, we love our kids. And I think you all immediately understand, but if you start to think of how you make meaning out of these two sentences, you will find that there is at the surface, there is no connection at all between these two sentences. And even on a semantic level, what is the connection between drive slowly and we love our kids? In order to understand this, you have to make a lot of assumptions. And first of all, you will look at the picture and you see that there's a picture, there's a little kid, and it's jumping after a ball. And then you make the inference, as we say, inferences. Okay, in this village, there will live kids. And those kids, when they play, for example, with a ball, they often act very spontaneously. And if the ball jumps on the street, they might jump after the ball and will not look at the traffic. So this drive slowly addresses, of course, car drivers or bus drivers or lorry drivers, motorcycle drivers. So please drive slowly in order to be able to stop if a child jumps on the street. And you see that all this goes into, you have to process into your head in order to understand this very simple text. It's actually not so simple as we might consider at first sight, because it's composed out of two different kind of signs. It is written language and it is images. So this we would already call a multimodal text, or PISA would call it a non-continuous text. And of course, this is not a disciplinary text, it's a general text. But of course, as soon as you start to look at a disciplinary text, things get much more complex. I will probably first show you this. So this is something we would consider as a disciplinary text. It is also a non-continuous text with written language and a lot of signs. And you have to, this is something where you really have to read very, very carefully. And you have to have a lot of previous knowledge. You need to know what an ecosystem is. You need to have an idea about energy flow, water cycling, nutrient cycling, and a lot of other terms which are actually disciplinary terms. So this will be a very complex task, really, to read and understand a text like this. It might be from a biology book or from a geography book. And then we have already a kind of disciplinary text. And what PISA focuses on, this is the theoretical model of reading literacy of PISA. So PISA says reading literacy has two main components. It is the information within the text, that's what we saw in our little traffic sign, and it is the external knowledge which you necessarily need to bring into the reading process in order to understand, even in such a simple example like the traffic sign. But of course, it's much more complex if you have to have a lot of knowledge on content and on the form or structure of text in disciplinary texts. So reading literacy always means both. To use the written information or the graphic information or picture information, whatever, within the text, and to bring in your previous knowledge. So this is what we learned when we talk about content area literacy or disciplinary literacy. We talk about this process, how to make meaning out of disciplinary texts. And what we learned from research in the last 20 or 30 years is that this is nothing which students can master only with the reading literacy they learn in their mother tongue lessons. So they really need the support of the math teachers, the geography teachers, the history teachers, the science teachers, etc. And here is the result of a Hungarian study. It was a PhD study with more than 1,600 students, 9 to 13-year-old students, how they solved mathematical tasks. And they found out here this graphic shows you, let's say, 12 students working on a mathematical task. The first one already fails on the word reading level because some words he simply doesn't understand. The 3 more students fail on text comprehension level because they do not understand the mathematical text as such. But the most difficult task is to transform the text, the mathematical text, into a mathematical task, into a calculation task. So this is called here problem representation, so that they transform a text into, okay, what do I need? Do I need to make an addition between some numbers or subtraction or whatever kind of mathematical operation do I need to do? And all this is the real challenge of mathematical tasks. Only then they start to count or to calculate. And here is only very few students actually fail here. They fail in the reading literacy processes on level 1, 2, and 3. So that's why math teachers have to teach to read and to understand math texts. So they have to work with text. And of course also to write, not only to read, but also to write texts, mathematical texts. If students have to explain how did I proceed in order to solve this problem, this mathematical task, then they have to verbalize what they did. And of course also this is part of literacy. So this is the situation, and that's why we said, okay, all teachers need to know about how to include reading and writing into their disciplinary lessons, into their different school subjects. And that's why we designed the Bacolod course. And it all starts with classroom practice. It starts with principles of lesson planning. Then it goes more into the details about the different structures of texts, what teachers need to know about the different kinds of disciplinary texts. Then how to teach disciplinary vocabulary for students in the different subjects, how to teach reading strategies, and how to do formative assessment or diagnostic assessment, how to find out what do my students already know and how can I support them to learn. And then the final module of this course is about implementing all these Bacolod principles into a known lesson plan. And the overarching goal of this Bacolod study is to support teachers' self-concept as teachers not only for content, but for content area literacy. So I think I have to hurry a little bit. Let me see. Actually, that's what we produced in our Bacolod course. And what I made available for you are the 2 main products which we worked out in Bacolod. It's the handbook for teacher trainers and the teacher's workbook. And in the handbook for teacher trainers, because it's a course for teachers' professional development, and we wanted teacher training institutions to work with this course, so we made available for the teacher trainers all the PowerPoint slides which we developed for all these 6 modules, including the comments on each slide and also the basic knowledge, all the basic knowledge of all the different modules. And in the teacher's workbook, you have all the work slides with which we work the teachers. And the idea is that teachers from the first moment on work very practical, that they always get tasked to try out in their own classroom practice. And also so they create their own portfolio. And these 2 materials, now they are pretty big. You see the handbook for trainers has 275 pages. The workbook for teachers, 170 pages, and you can download them actually if you want to work with this Bacolod material. I'm afraid that I have no time to go more into the details. I wanted to show you some of the basic principles of the Bacolod course. It's about the teacher's role and the learner's role, and our main learning model, which is the reading apprenticeship model. But probably I shouldn't do that now. And if you want to know more about it, then we can probably come back to it in our discussion, because I want to give the colleagues also the chance to present what they want to present. So I will quickly go through the rest of my slides. That are some of our Bacolod slides in module number 1. So the basic principles of the Bacolod course, which we teach in module number 1. And so it's our main model of how to teach literacy. We got a lot of inspiration from American colleagues from this wonderful project from California, the Reading Apprenticeship Framework, which we built on in our Bacolod curriculum as well. You can also still get this book, this Californian book. And this is the model which they developed, and it has metacognition at the basic in the center of all the 5 dimensions. So I wanted to talk to you about metacognition, but maybe we come back to that later, because also in Bacolod, we have metacognition as one of our main principles for all teaching of literacy. And we actually now we developed a nice way of how to teach the main metacognition approach to teachers in our professional development courses. It's about thinking aloud. If you read a text, really think aloud what is going on in your head as teachers. And so we make teachers work on a Sudoku, a Japanese Sudoku, and they have to think aloud when they solve this. So that's another nice picture about what we want our students. We want our students to become metacognitive learners who always reflect on their own learning process when they are learning, and they monitor their own learning process. That's this little man in the ear, which you can see on this nice picture from our Norwegian colleagues. You always have a little man in your ear questioning, did I really understand what I read, or what would I need in order to really understand and make meaning out of a text? So this is our Bacolod lesson planning framework. And you see here our main principles is metacognition, it's engagement, so really motivating and engaging students in learning, and it's about a supportive teacher-student interaction. And these are then our main content modules. We then, in the last 3 years, we transformed our Bacolod course, which was a face-to-face course, into a blended learning course. And this is what we just finished last year. And you can find the whole blended learning course if you go on the BLATEach website and you click on courses. Then you can find the master version of the BLATEach course, and you can use it, of course. It's free. You can translate it into your languages and can make use of it. So then I give you a general outlook, but that's something you can read for yourself. Why literacy is a basic human right, and why ELINet made a European Declaration of the Right to Literacy for everyone living in Europe. And here I come back to the ELINet website, where you find a lot of other interesting resources. If you want to improve literacy in your classroom, in your school, or in your community, you will find a lot of interesting material on ELINet. So go on the ELINet website, please. So that's my part. Thank you very much. Time for questions and comments after the second presentation, I assume. So I would like to give the word to Nicoletta and her colleague, please. Can you hear me? Are you still online?
Thank you very much, Christine. Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, I do. I do.
Yes, I'm still here. So yes, I just wanted to say, just quickly, thank you, Christine. I'm just going to put the documents you mentioned here just for like just quickly there again, if people want to download the handbooks and the workbooks that you just mentioned. And then we can move on to the next presentation by Nicoletta and Nathalie, and I'm sure they will also introduce themselves and the background and a little bit about the project that they do and how it all ties up to literacy. So I'm just going to put these away now, and I can share the documents again after the seminar, and we can take some questions after the both web presentations are done. So if you have any questions, put them into the chat box.